So I did a staycation like 2 weeks ago. It wasn't gonna work. So
Yeah.
that was still like one thing. We'll probably do a vacation like this this fall.
Okay.
Like,
How's mine?
yeah, he's healthy, running around.
Yeah, I saw he's playing soccer now.
Yeah,
That's good,
Soccer
yeah.
shots. Yeah, that's fun. It's like a cool age to like
Yeah.
start like
It's like
getting
he's
serious
enjoying
stuff. Like I can't just give them a curse. I can't just like pop.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, we can do this.
Are we all good down here?
Yep.
We're good.
Get us rolling.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome. I now call to order the July 5th, 2023 meeting of council committees for the City Council of the City of Lancaster. We'll begin with the roll call of members. Mr. Harris.
Yes, Madam President. Excuse me. Mr. Mann.
Here.
Mr. Royal.
Here.
Mr. Cleese.
Here.
Ms. Craig.
Here.
Ms. Diaz.
Here.
Ms. Walsh.
Here.
And President Beke.
Here. Our first item is the approval of the minutes of the June 5th, 2023 committee meetings.
Motion to approve.
Second.
We have a motion and a second on the minutes. Council comments on the minutes. Hearing none. Mr. Harris.
Mr. Mann.
Aye.
Mr. Royal.
Aye.
Mr. Cleese.
Aye.
Ms. Craig.
Aye.
Ms. Diaz.
Aye.
Ms. Walsh.
Aye.
And President Beke.
Aye. All right, our first committee meeting this evening is the Personnel Committee. Councilor Kalist.
Thank you, Madam President. The Personnel Committee has two items on the agenda for tonight. The items are two nominations to the Planning Commission. So the first nomination is Mr. Amos Stoltzfus to the Planning Commission as a regular member. And I guess Mr. Amos is not here tonight.
I don't believe Mr. Stoltzfus could attend this evening. Yes.
So we'll ask him to attend our next council meeting on July 11th. And the second item is the nomination of Charles Porter Stevens to the Planning Commission as an alternate member. Mr. Porter, please, would you come forward? Thank you for being here tonight. Would you please introduce yourself and tell us about your interest in serving on the Planning Commission?
Just hit that button and make sure that red light's on.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
All right. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for having me here and considering my nomination. As stated, my name is Charles Porter Stevens, though I typically go by my middle name, Porter. I'm interested in serving on the Lancaster City Planning Commission because I have a lifelong passion for city issues, for planning. I actually am a professional urban planner. I started my career, I have a master's in urban planning from the University of Louisville. I am originally from Louisville, Kentucky, so I am a transplant, full confession. However, quickly fell in love with Lancaster City. When I moved here, I was a bachelor. I am now married, have a kid, have a home here in the last 5 years. I hope that illustrates how quickly I figured out that this was a fantastic city and a place I wanted to really put down some roots. I currently work for Michael Baker International as a community planner. We're helping communities all across central Pennsylvania address long-term issues, short-term issues, everything from transportation to housing, natural land preservation, farmland preservation. Prior to that, I worked for 5 years as a community planner for the county of Lancaster, so just a few blocks that way. I didn't have the pleasure of being a liaison to Lancaster City specifically, but I did have the pleasure of working with urban, rural, suburban communities across Lancaster County and helping them out with any kind of number of planning issues. So I'd be very excited to be able to use the experience that I've accrued through my young but very active career and apply them to the Lancaster City Planning Commission. I should also note, I also currently serve as the Vice President of the Northeast, on the board of the Northeast Neighbor United Neighborhood Group. So I'm very excited to be in this city, to be able to serve the community I've come to know and love over the last couple of years. And I certainly would be delighted to take the experience and professional career I've created and apply it to helping make the city a better place for everyone, regardless of income level, age to live, work, and enjoy. So, thank you.
Yes, and what would you like to achieve on the Planning Commission board?
Well, there are a couple of issues that I definitely see as very pressing that need to be addressed in this city. Housing is the biggest one. I think that's on the chief of everyone's mind. How can we tweak the city's land use codes, subdivision ordinances to allow for a greater variety of housing in the city at a bigger variety of price points? Also, how can we apply those same principles to the commercial side of things? So how can we get a wider offering of local stores that offer basic goods to neighborhood residents, anything from groceries, butcher shops, hardware stores? How can we encourage the growth or retention of the ones that we have, because they are very much an endangered species, I think, in this day and age, in this economy. I've also taken relatively recently, but interest in transit, from walking, biking, and because the largest and growing expense in a typical household behind housing is transportation. So how can we better accommodate transportation in the city to allow people to not have to always drive to get where they're going, because that can be a huge personal expense.
Okay, any questions or comments from other members of the committee?
Councilor Kaliks. Not a question, but just want to thank Porter for his service to the county commission, the county planning department. And I got to know Porter very well through our Leadership Lancaster cohort, and he's very qualified when it comes to planning.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other comments or questions?
Councilor Kalist?
Please go
I will
ahead.
also say, not a question, but also a comment. I appreciate, Mr. Stevens, that you bring a planning background to this, and while it is, I will always make note, it is not a requirement to serve on these particular boards, commissions, and authorities to have a particular level of professional expertise. It is helpful to have someone with professional expertise serving on the board, even as an alternative member, as someone who has worked in that field and understands some of the principles of planning that can really help guide the work of the Planning Commission as a whole. And we have in front of us here, actually, I'll just speak to both of the appointees, two people that are deeply involved in their community. As Mr. Stevens has mentioned, his work with his neighborhood in the Northeast. And I can't think of any better qualification than that to serve on this particular commission. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any comments, questions from the public? No comments from council as a whole? Okay, thank you, Mr. Stevens, for your willingness to help to
Thank you,
serve on the board of the Planning Commission.
Thank you all for your
Okay,
consideration.
good luck. So we will move this nomination. I'll make a motion to move this nomination to our next council meeting on July 11th.
Second.
All in favors?
Aye.
Thank you, Madam President. That concludes the personnel committee.
Mr. Cleese?
Thank you. Councilor Cleese, I think Mr. Harris has a clarifying question for you about your motion.
Can we have a motion for Mr. Salzfus so I can move him to the agenda for the 11th?
Oh, now I'll make a motion to move the nomination of Mr. Amos Stoltz first to our next council meeting on July 11th.
Second.
All in favors?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Cleese. We'll send an invitation to Mr. Salzfus to please attend on the 11th. Thank you so much. We now go to our Public Works Committee meeting. Councilor Walsh.
Thank you, Council President. We have 4 items on the agenda this evening. The first being Council Resolution Number 46, 2023, recognizing Park and Recreations Month. I would love to invite Director Campbell up for the duration of the agenda to speak to some of these items that we have reviewing this evening. Just as a preview, the second is Administration Resolution Number 47, 2023, authorizing a grant application. 48, 2023, authorizing another grant application. We'll go over both of these again. And then lastly, hoping that Director Campbell is ready to provide a stormwater management program update. So let's start at the top, which is the resolution recognizing Parks and Recreation Month. was hoping that you could just speak to the wonderful parks and recreation programs that we do have in Lancaster City, and then hopefully talk about some of the staff that is able to support the programs that we have.
So thank you very much for this opportunity to propose this resolution. I would hope that the Executive Director of Recreation, Heather Digg, would be able to join us on the 11th, because the City of Lancaster is unique in having a Department of Parks and a separate Lancaster Recreation Commission. So these two entities need to work very closely together. The Parks is managed by the Department of Public Works, and the Recreation is programmed by the LRC, and they do a tremendous job working with us hand in hand and identifying not only the needs and the problems that have to be addressed, but identifying for us some of the capital work that has to be done to upgrade our facilities and to make facilities available for a wide variety of programs. A lot of them related to children and after-school programs, learning to swim, teaching about nature, teaching about the wide variety of recreational opportunities, basketball, indoor recreation opportunities, after-school learning, as well as a huge part of what they provide is daycare and after-school care services for a large number of the students in the Lancaster, the School Department of Lancaster. So the resolution, in large part, recognizes a variety of programs that the Parks and Rec provide in general. The programs help bring people together. Would you like me to read the whole? It's a long resolution, and I think you have a copy of the resolution in your packet. So the highlights that I wanted to point to were the fact that we work very strongly and well together. We have worked in tandem for at least the amount of time that I've been here, but we see each other as joined at the hip, basically, to be able to provide the services that the city needs in terms of recreation for adults, for children, for tweens, for others. I'm very proud of the work that we all do together. I'm very proud of the services that Lancaster Rec provides for the public and for the citizens of the city, and we're very happy for this resolution to commemorate this month.
Thank you, Director Campbell. Thank you for speaking on behalf of the LRC, and I do hope that the Executive Director comes to the full council meeting on the 11th. And as a child who went through, I think, every program that the LRC had to offer, and playing in the majority of the public parks, I personally want to thank you for keeping the city as wonderful as I remember it when I was a kid. And I know that your staff does a really nice job. You see them out working tirelessly even on days like this. So thank you for your service and your staff as well.
The staff is tremendously proud of the work that they do here and of the facilities that we have available to the public.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. Any questions from committee members for Director Campbell in regards to this resolution? From the committee or full council, any questions?
Councilor Walsh? Thank you. I just wanted to take a moment to thank you for bringing this to us and for highlighting the Lancaster Rec in their work. Truly, as a city alone, we could not provide all of the services that the Lancaster Rec provides. And it has been a fruitful partnership and really beneficial to all of our residents. I'm proud to serve on that board, but also proud, as Councilor Walsh said, to be a rec kid myself and learn to swim at Conestoga Pines and take dance classes at the rec. And they help us go above and beyond for our residents. And I appreciate that we are recognizing them in this way as a partner. So thank you.
Thank you as well.
Any other questions or comments from council? Any questions or comments from the public? All right, I'll make a motion to move this to full council, resolution 46, 2023 to full council on July 11th.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
You can tell me.
Next.
Moving right along. Next is Resolution 47, 2023. And this, I believe, is a resolution allowing the city of Lancaster to apply for a grant through DCED, which is the Department of Community and Economic Development, Keystones Community Program, for funding in the amount of $200,000 for the city's infrastructure improvements at Binns Park.
Yes. Thank you again for letting me introduce this one. This is frankly a matter of, hopefully, pro forma. The Binns Park is currently being upgraded and renovated as we speak. The budget that had been established for that was $650,000, $125,000 of which has been provided by the Binns family itself. This $200,000 has been already identified and approved for application to the Binns Park. However, we have to apply for it. So I'm simply asking for the assent for us to submit the application to be able to receive the funding that has already been designated for this purpose. The balance of $350,000 for the renovation of the park is part of the bond fund that we had already submitted before. This would reduce the amount of money that we need from the bond fund by the amount of $200,000.
This is wonderful. That's pretty straightforward. Is there any questions from committee members regarding the designation of funding already and just the final step of applying for it?
Yes.
If I may.
Absolutely.
Director Campbell, what specific, with the purpose to educate the public, what specific improvements proposed for the Binns Park?
Very good question. So there's some electrical work, upgrading of some of the lighting in the park. There is some ponding and some stormwater flooding that does take place, so that it's repair of that, so that we can manage the water and not have ponding. It is upgrading of some of the plantings and some of the planters. There is some structural or cosmetic work to some of the columns surrounding that part of the park, as well as the knee walls. There's some revisions to the knee walls. I think there's also a reconfiguration of the stage area so that it is better usable. Now that we have the Yule Plaza across the way, the Binns Park can be laid out as a much more passive sitting area park where the more active activities can be scheduled for Yule Plaza. Having said that, though, the intention to be able to have some sort of a staging area will remain so that those parks could be used in tandem as well as separately.
And are there any disruptions and impact on the usage of the park during the execution of the project?
There is. As many may know, there's a fence that surrounds the park right now. It's an interesting and peculiar working and physical relationship because the area under the portico is the counties, and the area open to the sky is the cities. So since the city is taking the responsibility for doing the restoration of the park, we have put the fence around the park so that we can get that work done, which will be completed by sometime in mid to late August. And we have been working closely with the county and with the homeless advocates, et cetera, to address the needs of the people who are often occupying that space. And hopefully, as we continue our conversations, we'll have better and better solutions as we move forward to address these needs. It is summertime, so the challenges before us doing this work are very different than if this work were being done in the wintertime. but they are pressing problems for the dishoused in all cases.
Thank you, Director Campbell. No more questions. Thank you.
Any other questions from committee members?
If I may. In regards to the project in itself, there is a location in the middle that usually had water for kids would play in. Is that something that also is going to be eliminated due to the flooding, or is that something that's going to stay?
Very good question, and I hope I'm not misstating as I say this. Because that is such a beloved piece, my belief is that it's being resuscitated and not reconfigured, but made so that it will continue to work. If there are clogged areas, et cetera, that will be addressed. The flooding areas are not related to that,
Okay.
to that water feature. They're related to some of the walkways that approach the center of the park. And it has more to do with how the park has settled over time.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell.
You're very welcome.
That is all.
Any questions from council?
If I may, Counselor Walsh, thank you, Director Campbell. I just have one quick question. Is the county matching any funds towards these improvements, as if some of the land is owned by the county?
For the improvements themselves, I do not believe so. It's a project that we had initiated internally, independent of the intermunicipal agreement that we're working on with the county. But the renovation of the park, it's a city park, and so we reached out to the Binns family themselves and determined that we needed to make the upgrades to fulfill the mandate, if you will, of the city.
Thank you.
Any other questions from council as a whole? And the public? Any questions or comments? All right, so I will make a motion to move resolution number 47, 2023 to full council on July 11th.
Second.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. The next resolution, 48, 2023, is also authorizing a grant application for the replacement of lead service lines, and this is an application to Penvest in the amount of not to exceed $1.9 million for the replacement of lead service lines in the blocks of 2nd to 5th and from the municipal boundary to Ash Street and the 26 and 31 alleys below Ash Street. Director Campbell, could you speak to this application, and have you been ultimately awarded this money and this is just an application to get it, or is this the normal, usual process of obtaining funding through application?
This is more of the usual process of trying to obtain funding through application. So this is an interesting and, to a certain extent, mildly challenging challenge that we have. There is, through the feds, a mandate that is going to go into place by October of next year for the replacement of all lead service lines for all municipalities and all residential facilities throughout the United States. We, as the City of Lancaster, recognize that there are a number of cases where we have lead service lines to many of our residential properties. Although we don't have as many other municipalities, we have a goodly number, and we, as most municipalities, have not identified all of the locations where there are lead lines. So part of the effort, as per the federal mandate, is to determine how many lead lines and where precisely those lead lines are located before October of 2024. If any lines are not identified at that point, they will be assumed to be lead, and one will have to implement a process for replacement with that assumption in mind. If during excavation one determines that those lines that were not known are in fact not lead, they will not need to be replaced. We, the City of Lancaster, have put in place a lead service line replacement program, which is currently being reviewed by the Public Utility Commission. And so, although we have every intention of moving forward with it as quickly as practical, we are awaiting that approval before we can initiate the official public messaging, information, education, noticing, and timelines involved with what will be required to replace these lead service lines. We expect that approval by sometime in September. However, there are federal funds available to be able to address some replacement of lead lines now. And one of our deadlines, there's a deadline for one of these funding sources of August 3rd. So although it seems like we're putting the cart before the horse, we are requesting the ability to make an application for lead service line replacement for the particular community involved where we have a large certainty of the percentage and the number and location of lead service lines. This will be the first of a number of such applications that will be taking place over the course of the next 12 to 14 months. And it will be a process that helps, if you will, prove the process and help us improve the process if it does not work quite so smoothly. The $1.9 million was based on our current knowledge of lead service lines that are in that area and our intention to be able to identify for that particular community any that we don't know that might be outstanding. We already had in place a program for lead service line replacement that has been underway for the last several years, but we have not been doing as many lines as the current new mandate will require. The intention being, as an example, that once you've identified the location of all these lead lines by October of 2024, that you would enter into a program where you would guarantee that the remaining lead service lines will be replaced within a certain period, and that period can be anywhere from 10 years to 30 years, depending on financial capability, among other things. This grant would allow us to address the lead service lines in this particular community at no cost to the residents, and therefore not only test the process, but also help us find the opportunities and the other sources of funding that are being made available on a nationwide basis to alleviate the lead service line problem.
Thank you, Director Campbell. That answered a lot of the questions I had in regards to what was the date that they need to be located by, so October 2024.
Yes.
And then the bigger cost being the replacement period of once you identify it from 10 to 30 years, you need to replace it. And
Yes.
then who is the federal agency that you are working, or who is setting this mandate from the federal level?
It's the Department of Environmental Protection
Okay.
in conjunction with EPA. And I say that partly because part of the challenge is that there are slightly differing and slightly contradictory requirements by each of those agencies. And without clear guidance from either agency, most municipalities are left to fend for themselves to determine a process by which we meet the mandate.
That's crystal clear. And just a few other questions. So in regards to the program replacement program that the city has built that's being reviewed by the public utility company, you said there's a deadline of 9/23 that the review should be completed. And at that point, does that program, is that like a green light for you to, I guess my question is, how does the local program tie into the national mandate? Is the local program addressing the mandates within?
You're asking the very same questions that we're all asking.
Okay.
Our hope and assumption is that once we have a concurrence from the PUC, that they've approved our lead service line replacement plan, that if there are reservations or contradictions from the other agency, that those would be understood and addressed by the PUC approval. And this is a way forward that many municipalities are taking. Either get your approval from the PUC, and therefore, if you will, partner with the PUC to argue that the distinctions that one agency requires versus the other be negotiated. An example is there's a two-step process by EPA for where you have one line of verification and then you have to independently verify with another process. Tremendously expensive, often multiple excavations to do the same thing. What we have proposed, which is consistent with DEP, is a single verification that is consistent with what DEP had required in previous circumstances. If PUC concurs with that, our argument will be that we do not need to, or nor should be required to do a second type of verification. But there's a lot of gray in between either of those objectives.
Thank you for helping me navigate through that. And I think my last question is, you said this application is due on August 31st. Is there any reason why, can you submit multiple applications? Like, I know that we have this identified area here. Would it be possible to submit multiple applications if you have other areas that you have strong suspicion that there are lead pipes, or is this a one application per applicant?
A very good question. The date that it's due is August 3rd.
Okay.
Which is why we needed to get to this particular committee meeting for next week's council meeting. But yes, there is the opportunity to apply as many times as we would like to. There are different strategies that one can use. We're using a strategy called a neighborhood-based strategy, but we can apply as many times as we would like. We want to do it once first to confirm that it's what those processes are and that we're doing it exactly what needs to be done, so that we don't either duplicate or do a lot of unnecessary work along the way. But once we get the first one through, and if it gets approved properly, we want to use that model for many of the other communities. This would be independent of, and it'll be made clear in a lot of the literature that goes out during the month of likely September, where we message to the public and to private residents and private property owners, et cetera. This is one of several of the methods that we're going to be using to not only identify the lead service lines, but also to find the funding and ways of minimizing, if not eliminating, any cost to the public for these replacements that are necessary, mandated by the feds.
Well, I appreciate your due diligence in trying to find these funding sources, because I know these mandates often don't reflect at the most local of levels the cost.
Correct.
There's not any sort of incentive to do this financially. So thank you. Any other questions from the committee?
If I may, Councilor Welch. In regards to the blocks that we have here, which would be like from 2nd to 5th Street, and then we have Alley and Ash Lane, do you foresee any additional streets that would be part of that? For example, if the line keeps going further and you have to go into another street in order to take care of that at the same time, is that something that you foresee in the future?
So you're asking an interesting question, and the simple answer is, for this one application, we're going to stay within a very specific confine. If it's determined that there are other lines across the street, that will be part of a subsequent application to do exactly the same work. Part of the challenge that we have is that there's regulations regarding the service line from the water main in the middle of the street to the curb line, which is the public's domain. That's the part that the city owns anyway. And the part from the curb to the front of the house, which is the responsibility of the property owner. And so we needed to be able to identify a very specific neighborhood boundary in order to say, this is what we're dealing with and this is what we're not dealing with. But the exact same principle will apply every time we put in an application or establish it as a neighborhood. We're not going to be limited to doing it as neighborhoods. There are other sources of funding where we could do it by zoning district, by community area, with other criteria. But this is some low-hanging fruit where the requirements are very straightforward and very specific. But if there's anything that suggests that it needs to extend, we will extend it with a subsequent application. And the reason we selected this particular neighborhood was it was one of the next neighborhoods on our regular list for abatement in the first place. So we had a better sense of how many were affected and which ones they would be.
And in regards to the infrastructure that are, I would say, in the residence portion of it, because most of those homes are older homes, and they have what I would call the infrastructure is like, I don't know if it's clay, I can't recall exactly what material it is. Terracotta. So do you see issues where the line will start breaking? Because I know my neighbor had that problem, and he had to get a new line replaced, and he wasn't even aware of what was going on. So my concern would be, do you foresee any issues? I mean, we're replacing it, but is there anything that you foresee that the owner would have issues with inside their home?
It's never a simple answer. But we have a contingency, which is usually around 10%, but we don't foresee major challenges because most of the lead or most of the service lines, whether they're lead, copper, or other materials, are connected to the main. The main might be terracotta, but there's a coupler or a connector that it's connected to. And we would not need to remove that coupler, we would just need to remove the line from the connector. On those occasions where something might break, if it's in the main, it's the city's responsibility anyway. If for some reason it's on the private side, and if it's a line that goes into the house rather than just to the outside of the house, then that's part of the contingency as well. We would need to take care, it needs to be set up in such a way that even though it'll be inconvenient to the property owner, it should be financially held harmless.
Thank you so much.
Any questions from council as a whole?
Director Campbell, just out of curiosity, how do we identify the lead line?
This is such fun, having these kinds of conversations. So the guidance that we are being given by DEP is for each property owner to take a dime or a nickel, go down into their basement, scratch off the side of the metalwork, the line, take a photograph of that and send that in for verification. Now, I'm not especially thrilled with that as a process.
Fascinating science.
We're working with a variety of different ways of being able to address how to confirm the material of the service line, and there's a variety of ways of doing that. Part of it may be to partner with some of our entities who are doing building or site inspections for other purposes, but that will still only deal with a very small percentage of the properties in question. Others are we're looking at what's called a mechanical verification, where you confirm the year that certain houses were built and what are the service lines made of in those particular areas, and make a better estimation of the percentage of service lines that are likely to be led in that particular area, and thereby confine the cost or the likely cost of that kind of replacement. But there's a variety of ways of doing it, and unfortunately, as I've said, we as the municipalities are not being given great guidance at the federal level on what to do and how to do it to meet their own requirements.
Thank you.
Councilor Calise, you had a question?
Thank you, Councillor Wash. Director Campbell, what efforts have been made to inform the residents living in those affected areas about the project?
So as with every other lead service line replacement that we've been doing over the last several years, there are door hangers, there's written notifications, there are letters that go out to those particular property owners, informing them of what's about to happen for those particular lines. That's what will happen for the Gem Streets area as well for this particular application. And once we have an approval by the PUC for our lead service line replacement plan, we will be doing a much broader and larger broadcasting of information with door hangers, with letters, giving people some better estimation of when they can expect people to be coming by and how to do the verification of the material for their lines. But the lines for the first application will be done exactly the same way as we've done them for the last several years for the ones we've been replacing.
And do the property owners have any roles or responsibilities in the process?
They have had some responsibilities in the past. Because this is and let me step back for a second, they've had those responsibilities because there have been many cases where either the property owner had authorized or had performed the work themselves, which was contrary to a later regulation, or there was some other damage that was being done, and under the regulations in a third-class city in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, they would be responsible for those. Under this kind of a mandate where it is the government and the feds that are saying we want to replace and eliminate lead service lines, they would not have the direct cost of replacement of the lead service lines. There may be ancillary costs. If the service line is under one of your bushes or something that is yours, it is not, under most circumstances, it is not the city's responsibility to replace that bush or to replace something that was personal, because technically, from the face of the house to the curb, in most cases, is still within the public right-of-way and is even though it's the responsibility of the property owner, it is not the responsibility of the public to restore private materials in that zone. There are exceptions, and those exceptions will be clarified in the communications that go out to everybody.
And are there any plans to provide information about potential health risks associated with lead in drinking water and measures to mitigate exposure during the replacement project?
Yes, a lot of the communication that already goes on describes the risk or the limit of risk to the public for lead in our service lines. We have additives, et cetera, in our water supply that minimize that risk already. The federal regulations do not necessarily take into account measures that any municipality has already undertaken to protect the citizenry. But in our messaging, in our literature, there will be description of what we do with our water that protects you, to what extent are you at risk, what kinds of precautions must one take, et cetera, yes.
What is the timeline for the project?
So for this particular application project,
Yes.
our goal will be, once we have official approval from the PUC, that's about the time that the funds would be available, and we would start that project immediately upon approval from the PUC, which means the messaging, if we get something from the PUC that says you are likely to be approved, we'll start the messaging ahead of time. But if not, we'll wait till we get the approval, and we'll start the messaging immediately. We're already writing that messaging, making sure that it's in multiple languages, in a variety of other graphic as well as verbal media.
Thank you, Director Campbell. No further questions. Thank you, Councilor Wash.
Absolutely. Any other questions from council?
Counselor Walsh?
Sure.
Director Campbell, thank you. It strikes me that $1.9 million is a rather large grant for infrastructure. We've talked in the past about how it's difficult to get grant money for infrastructure at all. Can you tell us about how many homes are in this area, just to get an idea of like overall cost per home, or how many people are being or would be impacted, or can be, how many lines can be abated with this amount of money?
We have estimated there's approximately 300 homes that are addressed by this. We imagine, based on our own mechanical calculations, that there's somewhere probably in the neighborhood of 100 to 140 of them that are lead, and we need to be able to test or visit the others to confirm or deny what those materials are for the others. That computes to anywhere from approximately $6,000 to $14,000 per line for investigation. Now, as time goes on, hopefully there'll be more information available. We will have, by October of 2024, we will have gone through several versions of testing and trying to verify what kinds of buildings or what age of buildings or what sites were likely built with lead service lines versus non. And hopefully we can reduce the risk and not have to, rather than checking 1 out of every 2 facilities, hopefully we'd be down to checking 1 out of every 10 or 1 out of every 20 with a greater level of certainty. And our lead service line replacement plan has that decreasing, or I should say increasing level of specificity based on the methodology for data collection.
Thank you so much for that.
Any other questions from council? Questions from the public? I think there's 2.
Tim Stuhldreher, One United Lancaster. 2 questions following on President Bakay's questions. Number 1, what percentage of the city's total lead line issue will be addressed through this $1.9 million grant? And secondly, you said the grant would go toward investigation. Just want to confirm it will also go toward mitigation?
So the regulations or the law will require that there's verification, or that you have identified, to the best of your data-based mechanical ability, within financial reason, all lines, all service lines that go to residences in any municipality. This 1.9 is based on the lines that we already know about and a community that has been built in large part during a particular period of time. And so we have a relatively good certainty of the numbers of likely lead service lines in this particular area. I cannot say that what percentage of the total it addresses, but by addressing 300 out of a community of maybe 1,000 or 1,200 properties, what is that? 1/2 of 1%, 1/3 of 1% is what is being addressed. And it's part of a matter of how to test the process to confirm that this is a valid and a verifiable way of doing this work. We expect that there's going to be lots of similar situations, but we also expect that basically, I mean, just in rough terms, we're imagining that only about 1/3 to 1/4 to 1/3 of the lines that are unknown may be lead. So it's part of an ongoing calculus and an ongoing mathematical and mechanical verification process to determine what percentage of the work is yet to be done. As mentioned before, come October of 2024, there will be a list of properties that we have verified or know through mechanical purposes are lead lines or are not, and there'll be a certain number that we do not know for sure either way. It will then need to be assumed that anything that is not known is lead, and we'll have to go forward accordingly with whatever that number is.
I think we had one question in the back.
Counselor Walsh, if I could just, I forgot at the top of the meeting to make my standard reminders and announcements. And I know Mr. Soldrayer has been to meetings before, but we have some visitors that may not have been to public meetings. So I'll just make my standard public comment announcement at this time. If you're making public comment, do so at the podium. You're already on your way. Thank you. Please begin with your name for the meeting record, your block of residence, whether it's in the city or not. And your comments are limited to up to 3 minutes. Okay. Thank you. I want to get that matter of procedure out of the way.
My name is David Bazo, B-A-Z-O-W. I live on the 500 block of 3rd Street. And my first question is, for what has been currently going on with line work in that area, is that directly related to the work that you're talking about going into order? But also, is there a platform for residents such as myself, who may not be as educated on this topic as they probably should be, could go and do some research to figure out what exactly is happening in that space? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bazo, for that question. There's 2 parts to it. The first part is not necessarily. So we have always, the city of Lancaster has always been doing some sorts of work in the public right-of-way. Some of the work might be by UGI or PPL. Some of it might be us in our conventional water main replacement or sewer line replacement work. In those cases where we are doing water line replacement work and we do from the main to the curb and find that that line is lead, we assume that the line from the curb to the house is likely lead as well, and we would ordinarily go ahead and replace that. Those who have gone through this process recognize that when we do that, we also give a temporary replacement, a flexible hose. By ordinance, we're required to keep that there for no less than 4 weeks or something like that. But in no case have we removed it before the property owner has had the opportunity to replace the line if we put it in as temporary. Under this program, we would be taking the responsibility for not just removing the line, but replacing that line. The second part of your question was related to information. Part of the information that we'll be providing for people is not only the hangars and and literature and et cetera, but there will be an interactive website where you'd be able to find out more about the nature of this lead challenge, the breadth of it, because it is nationwide, what other municipalities have done or have been able to do or have not necessarily been able to do, and what are the variety of options that you might have. It is something that in the spirit of, I'm going to say it this way, in the spirit of trying to ensure the greatest opportunity for aggressively managing public health issues without bankrupting the municipalities in question, we're all trying to be very responsible as we can to the sins of our predecessors, the facts that often materials were put in place that were not necessarily healthy, and we've mitigated that by some of the additives we have in our water, et cetera. But the best way to eliminate the problem is to eliminate the material. So everyone is trying to be as responsible as practical, but we all recognize that this can be an incredibly expensive proposition, especially for older cities where a lot of new development took place during a period where lead lines were considered benign. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but to the extent possible, we will be providing a variety of places where one can gain information. And if what we provide is not sufficient, we will still be open to finding other channels for gathering and disseminating information as well.
Thank you, Director Campbell. If there's no further discussion or questions around this resolution, I'd like to make a motion to move Resolution 48, 2023 to full council on July 11th.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And lastly, on the committee's agenda is the Stormwater Management Program update and Green Infrastructure Design Manual update.
Yes. So I thank you very, very much. I'd like to invite my colleague, Molly Dager, who is our stormwater manager. She is a contractor from Jacobs Engineering, and we have brought her on and hired her to be our stormwater manager for the interim. And she has been involved with not only our stormwater ordinance, but also the assessment of policies and procedures for implementation and our revisiting of the green infrastructure design guidelines. So this frankly is a two-part presentation, one which is the annual report of stormwater management, and the second part is what we have proposed and worked out with the local engineers in terms of implementation and upgrade of the green infrastructure design guideline.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you for the introduction, Director Campbell, and it's a pleasure to meet you all. I've come to learn a lot about stormwater and Lancaster. It's one of my favorite topics, and hopefully I can answer any questions that you have. It's a really impressive program. And yeah, I'd like to tell you a little bit about stormwater and green infrastructure as a whole, and then jumping into some of the current updates from the last year, if you'd like to go ahead in advance. So starting with the why, some of you are aware that Lancaster has a consent decree with EPA and the State Department of Environmental Protection to reduce or eliminate the overflows from the combined sewer areas in the city of Lancaster. These sewers at the time were considered high technology. We're one of 770 cities across the nation with combined sewers. It is a combination of stormwater and wastewater that during most events reach the advanced wastewater treatment plant in the city of Lancaster, but during high weather events does discharge into the Conestoga River, creating a lot of pollution associated with raw untreated wastewater into our cities, into the city, into the stream. There is a real effort from a regulatory standpoint to eliminate those. We also have an MS4 in the city of Lancaster. This is for the separate sewer area. So not all of the city of Lancaster has these combined sewers. There are some more traditional or current separate storm sewer areas. However, in the Chesapeake Bay, which the Conestoga River is tributary to, some folks have been aware in the last few years of the water quality goals to improve the Chesapeake Bay. This is largely associated with nutrients and sediment that comes from agricultural sources, but also from urban sources within cities such as Lancaster. So there are also regulatory applications there. Another thing that makes Lancaster unique is the subsurface conditions. We are underlain with carbonate geology, which means we are more prone to sinkholes. Sinkholes can form or be exacerbated by a concentration of stormwater. We have a lot of successful stormwater practices, hundreds across the city. It does make it a bit more challenging during design and construction to make sure that we're being sensitive with all of the other urban constraints as well. The city's zoning is unique in the city of Lancaster. There is currently a 100% build out allowed, so there does not need, from a zoning standpoint, any green space to manage stormwater. However, with all of these ordinances and regulatory implications, stormwater does need to be considered, and so we have multiple programs, and again, I'm happy to be learning about these and working to improve and enhance stormwater and green infrastructure in the city of Lancaster. Green infrastructure, we'll refer to it as GI as well, is a way to make the urban landscape work more like a sponge. So we want to absorb the stormwater, we want to recharge the groundwater, we want to send water to our streams via subsurface flow to eliminate and reduce flooding and reduce these combined sewer overflows. So that's a little bit about the why, if you want to kind of jump to the next slide. The Sustainability and the Environment Division, which I'm happy to be a part of, takes all of these regulatory implications, these zoning challenges, and really wants to make the best out of this. We want the cleanest air, the cleanest water to really support the best possible quality of life for Lancaster. So a bit of a timeline here. Green at Lancaster and the city's commitment to using green infrastructure began in 2010. At the time, what the city considered was a good idea. Let's adopt this. We know this is happening. So it was the green infrastructure plan was adopted by the city in 2011. From 2011 to 2018, there were 57 projects across the city. So these are your porous pavements that you've seen. These are rain gardens that you've seen. These are different planter boxes, subsurface infiltration. So 57 of those projects were constructed across the city from 2010, 2011 to 2018. In 2019, what was really now years of data, years of monitoring, years of maintenance, really was helpful in making a commitment to the EPA and to DEP that we can use green infrastructure as a powerful tool to reduce these combined sewer overflows within the city of Lancaster. Unlike traditional gray infrastructure approaches that they're called, green infrastructure has social benefits, it has economic benefits. It is less expensive to construct than separating the pipes and creating a separate stormwater pipe and a separate wastewater pipe. There are places across the city where that is appropriate, and the city is considering those, but largely a big way to help these combined sewer overflows is through the construction of green infrastructure. So the green infrastructure plan was revised, and a lot more of these lessons learned and moving forward ways that concrete evidence was put into the 2019 green infrastructure plan. And then since then, we do yearly reporting as part of the consent decree. And so since then, from 2019 to 2022, there have been 30 green infrastructure projects constructed. And we can get a little bit more into sort of the rates of this progress and what we hope to achieve in the long term with that. You can go ahead to the next slide. This is a map of the sewer sheds of the city of Lancaster. So some of you might be familiar with the term watershed. We are part of the Chesapeake Bay watershed. We are part of the Conestoga River watershed. This is anything that falls on the ground drains to the Conestoga River within the city of Lancaster. But we have a unique, it's not unique to the city of Lancaster, but in combined sewers and for sewer systems, the sewer shed refers to where in the city there could be an overflow, or where they might be, where we otherwise can, in normal events, direct water to the wastewater treatment plant. So in later slides, we'll talk more about these terms. So I just wanted to kind of introduce folks to where these are. We have the Angleside sewer shed, the North sewer shed. Those comprise the majority of the area in Lancaster, in the city of Lancaster, for the combined sewer areas. And then the Susquehanna and Stevens are smaller sewer sheds. You can see in this map too, the sort of dashed black line is the city boundaries. So I just wanted to sort of point out that, again, we do have separate sewer areas. A large focus through the consent decree is to focus on the combined sewer areas, but that's not all of Lancaster, and we have a lot of efforts to improve water quality in the separate sewer areas as well. You can go ahead. This table and associated graphics are from the 2022 annual report that was in the packet. And what we like to show is through basically the cumulative projects across the city where GI has implemented. These are projects where city funds have gone into this. This is projects where public right-of-way or city-owned property is managed. So impervious areas drain to these areas, and just some kind of helpful metrics on the left. You can, on the table, you can see those sewer sheds. MS4 refers again to the separate sewer areas, so that's kind of the other. And then what we have here is a number of projects, total area managed, so that's all of the impervious, the streets, the sidewalks, the, in some cases, buildings, parking lots in some cases that drain to these green infrastructure projects. And what we can do is, through a series of calculations, equate that to, and this has been calibrated through modeling and through monitoring, how much volume capture these green infrastructure practices remove each year. And then we can also equate that to a CSO, or combined sewer overflow reduction in gallons per year. One thing that I just wanted to sort of point out is, again, thinking back to that timeline slide, in 2011, from 2010, 2011 to 2018 was sort of the pilot effort. And then there were 57 projects at that point that had been done. And at that point, they were constructed at a rate, that data then was used to project how many projects should be done per year in order to help meet some of these targets that we have through the EPA. So what we saw at the end of 2022 is that we are roughly on target, based on the city's projections of how much stormwater we think we can manage through green infrastructure projects. The target rate in Greenit was about 5.4 acres per year of new impervious that we could manage. So about 5.5 acres from, again, typically public areas using city funds. And we are roughly at that target right now through the end of 2022. So, one of the things that I really pride the city of Lancaster on is being opportunistic with these projects. So there was public comment before about, projects in the city streets. There are a lot of other capital improvements, necessary utility upgrades, necessary paving. And when you can pair these green infrastructure projects, planned park improvements, when you compare that, it really does help to keep the costs of these improvements down. We do have this federal mandate, but we want to do this as cost effectively as we can. And so I really do pride the city in doing that. And we hope to continue to prioritize that to keep it as cost effective as possible. Okay. And then next slide. A lot has been talked about, we've discussed a lot of green infrastructure in general. But I did just want to point out, and this is discussed in a little bit more detail in the report, that the stormwater program is not just construction of GI. There is monitoring, there's maintenance, there's a lot of outreach that happens, processing and review of stormwater permits actually in the private sector, the management of the stormwater management fee, which goes to help fund some of these projects and the staff to support the stormwater program, and then a really impressive urban forest and tree planting as well. So it's really important that we remember how much the city is doing with that. It's really, really impressive. And the next slide. Something that I hope you all can see if you haven't already is we are about to do the final walkthrough this week, the Longs Park Wetland Project. This is in Longs Park in the city of Lancaster, right on the outskirts. This is actually a project to help with the MS4, so this is in the separate sewer area, but a really great and visible, lot of plantings to really help with water quality goals of water that ultimately discharges into the Conestoga River. So this goes back to the Chesapeake Bay project. If that middle picture is a video, I don't know if it's going to work. Would you mind trying to click on it? That's one of the things that I fixed. So you really need to take a look. The upper right photo shows it as well. It takes water from Longs Park Pond, pumps it up into a series of wetland treatment cells. There's a really high-tech sand filter with an iron aggregate, which helps with water quality, pollutant removal. There's a boardwalk. We're working on educational signage, and we're also working on a ribbon cutting for after Labor Day. So this is we're really proud of this project, and we hope that you can take a look at it if you haven't already done so. I think the fence was coming down today.
This is going to be an opportunity for the public to be able to see firsthand and walk around what this kind of green infrastructure is about, how it works, see how it works, get your hands into it if necessary, but also have the the ability to see the education of what are you seeing and how does it operate. This, on a very, very large scale, is the same types of operations that you see in the green infrastructure on Charlotte Street, on Mulberry Street, et cetera. They operate differently but they're at hugely different scales, but this is an exemplary opportunity for the people to get firsthand taste of what this works, what this is, how it works.
Okay. That's okay. It's water flowing out of there. I'll just add a caption there. It's better in person anyway. All right, we can go to the next. This is the last thing here. So another important part of green infrastructure and the city's investment in green infrastructure is being able to maintain the city's green infrastructure. So there's a lot of porous pavement applications across the city, and there was a new piece of equipment purchased early this year that the results are just amazing. What it does is it jets water into porous pavement and then sucks it back up. You can see the photo on the right is just one pass in one small section of what was collected. This is at the Plum and Walnut site near the Lancaster Brewing Company for the porous pavers out of there. So I just wanted to share, and then we can sort of end on this, some of the data for that space in particular. Water drain, 1 gallon of water drained at a rate of 7.6 inches per hour before the equipment was run, which isn't terrible. However, after several passes with this equipment, we went from 7.6 inches per hour to 395 inches per hour. It basically drained faster, or almost as fast as we could use a stopwatch for. So it's really amazing. We have several other examples of just very great results. So this is a really important component, and the city is really making an effort to maintain our investment and really expand the life cycle of these construction projects.
And by utilizing this kind of equipment and having predictable maintenance schedules, et cetera, we can be predictable. We can predict how much water gets managed and realize the investment in green infrastructure, and therefore, hopefully, reduce the costs involved in addressing the consent decree. Because this, in large part, is the better way, in my opinion, to manage much of the quality of water and the quantity of water going into the Conestoga. It will not eliminate the requirements from the consent decree, and it may actually change up something, but we have a financial capability assessment that we're all involved in, and this is part of what makes it financially compelling to continue to invest in this way.
Okay. All right. That's all that we had for this item.
Thank you so much. I certainly want to allow everybody the opportunity to ask questions because it's a lot of dense information. And I always have the same questions when we're discussing stormwater management. And my question is always, how do we know we're being successful? How do we know we're hitting a benchmark? How do we know it's working? And I think with the report that you have given today, I feel much better about now I understand how it's working and what it looks like, and all the different forms and facets that go into it. And I was really happy to see that you had put the other focus areas, because I think oftentimes, we're presented with projects, are we approving this? This is what this means, or this is what this ordinance does. But to actually see it in practice and then see it holistically, to say it's not just this one-time investment, but rather the sustainability of that investment, namely in maintenance. I'm trying to think of questions that I have. I think I'm still just absorbing a lot of the information. But I think the one graph, I do have a specific question, and again, it comes back to how do we know that we're being successful? But is there any metric that we are hitting? Because I see year after year, if you go to the GI projects and their impact, specifically around the estimated capture volume, how that, it's a seemingly very large number. like, what is 100%? Or, I'm just trying to understand, like, captured versus the entirety of it. Would you say that we capture, and if this isn't a metric that doesn't even mean anything, please feel free to stop me, but I'm just trying to get the expanse of everything that is completed within these projects.
It's a hugely important question. It's not a simple answer. It will be very difficult to eliminate all combined sewer overflows in the city of Lancaster. Part of our consent decree, and Director Campbell alluded to this, is a financial capabilities analysis. So how much can the city of Lancaster afford to reduce the combined city overflows? And that analysis is currently underway. And so we don't yet know what our final number, what the obligation is. There's other complicating factors such as with population growth, wastewater flows will increase, which inherently also increases the amount of water in those pipes. So it's not just a stormwater question at that point too. I think, one way to answer your question is that it's a high number and it's a relatively low amount, but it's impressive how, through the investment, we'll just continue to chip away at this, and it is a meaningful target, and, we've managed a lot and we've reduced a lot over the years.
If I could add to that, in the Greenit report from 2019, the updated version in 2019, there had been a target established based on the infrastructure that we had, which was to be able to manage approximately 153.5 acres by the year 2039. And we are on target, if not just a little bit ahead of target, in meeting the goals that were established there. And that goes to the how many acres per year do you make available? And if the target is 5.4 acres per year, and we're hitting approximately 5.8 acres per year, we are continuing to stay just above that. However, as Molly had said, it does mean we need to continue to be vigilant and to identify the opportunities and the projects in the public right-of-way, in the public parks, et cetera, that allow us to hit a higher target. And it also goes to, and this might end up being part of the segue to the next part of the presentation, it goes to how do we deal with our ordinances and how do we make it easy, if not understandable, to meet or to address the stormwater management needs of the private sector as well as in the public sector.
Thank you for that explanation and the answer to my question. And Director Campbell, thank you for making the call back to the 2019 report, because I know, I think you've had to remind me of it several times, that we do have metrics in place when I say, what are those questions, or what are those benchmarks, and what are we aiming towards? And that report does a very nice job of outlining what we are aiming for. I think that those are all the questions that I have for this evening. Thank you so much for presenting the depth and breadth of detail of where we are and having those visual examples. I'm happy to entertain any questions from the committee. And
If I may,
Sure.
Counselor, I have a question regarding the safety of the infrastructure that we have. There has been several complaints in regards to someone falling into the corners of the infrastructure that has been built in the city. So to prevent those injuries in the future, has anything come up in reference to discussion like putting a yellow sign? The person wasn't elderly, and I gather she couldn't see it very well, and she fell into it and she got injured. So
I will say that there are a number of things that we've been trying to do. I'm not necessarily aware of any recent situation, but as infrastructure had been installed during my tenure at least, we often did a quality assurance piece and a walkthrough to try to see or identify where there were vulnerabilities or places where people might be able to step in. And we actually did some re-engineering and would close up some of those openings, et cetera. But that was often for the new infrastructure, not necessarily for infrastructure that had already been in place. for that which is already in place, we have actually done 2 or 3 other things. One is identified an arts, I'm not sure what we call the program, but we've worked with students, we've worked with young people, we've worked with Stevens, we've worked with artists in the artist community to be able to paint around the stormwater grills so that people are much more aware not only of where they are and what they look like, but the function that they play in terms of trying to clean the water that goes into the Conestoga. So we're working with the artist community, we're working with youth, we're working with community organizations. In the Adopt a Block program, you have the ability either to adopt storm grates or work with your Adopt a Block organization and have access to tools and equipment to be able to keep those grill areas clean. If it is the case that something is not yet visible, we are very open to finding the way of making it more visible, whether it's putting up either brighter paint or anything that makes it more visibly identifiable. I'm very, very sorry if people have been inconvenienced or even hurt by infrastructure that needed to be changed or upgraded or addressed, but we are very open to being able to address any and all of those kinds of situations.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell. I will have her reach out to you.
Please, thank you.
Councilor Walsh. I think you addressed my first question, which these numbers don't include any private stormwater projects through permitting, the calculation of the impact of those. That's right. How does the work that Lancaster has done in stormwater management stack up to other municipalities that are all facing the same problem and are faced with the same challenges from the EPA and unfunded mandates and all of those fun things? How does our work stack up to what other cities are doing? That's for either of you.
It'll end up being from both of us.
Lancaster is certainly a leader in terms of municipalities of our size. Early adopters of green infrastructure, many successful implementations, a lot of lessons learned. And even compared to larger municipalities, we continue to be an early adopter and a leader of green infrastructure. There are several cities, a lot of older cities across the country and certainly regionally that are taking similar approaches, some similar timeframes, I would say, as well.
I also think that not only was the city forward-looking by adopting green infrastructure as a strategy in the 20-teens, but by doing it in the way that it was done, it allowed us to be seen as leaders in this area. So many people from other municipalities throughout the country and other parts of the world actually come to Lancaster to see what we've done and how we do it. That does not mean that we sit on our laurels. We continue to try to improve what we do and try to understand where it has not necessarily worked properly. I'm hoping, even though this was a mild spring, and I'm hoping I'm not jinxing it, many people talk about the gremlins when I mention this, but we've had several severe weather events in the last couple of weeks, and the types of ponding and flooding that plagued us in the past are not necessarily happening in the way that they had happened before. Is that to say that they've been prevented totally? No. But it is to say that much of the flood prevention aspect of stormwater management is actually working. We are retrofitting it where necessary in cases where the green infrastructure created more of a problem than a solution. And we have taken out, in some cases, some green infrastructure and either replaced it with re-engineered green infrastructure or just eliminated it for that time being, understanding that there may be a larger or different solution that needs to be done. So we're constantly learning from what we do. We constantly share what we're learning with the larger green infrastructure community, and we're more than happy to share it. The event where we showed off the Triveris, for instance,
Yes.
that was do you remember what the name of that event was?
It was the 40th anniversary of a partnership between EPA and the National Fish and Wildlife Federation. They did a tour within the Chesapeake Bay and picked the city of Lancaster to highlight some of our green infrastructure at the Plum and Walnut site.
And that was our opportunity to show off this brand-new equipment and show off how effective it was.
And to welcome any additional funds that they might have.
Yes, please, yes. Not
Good
least
thinking.
of which, to welcome additional funds.
Thank you so much for that.
Councilor Walsh, if I may?
Yes. Go ahead, Counselor Royal, and then I'll come back.
Oh, sorry. First of all, thank you for the presentation. I consistently get amazed by all the work that your team is doing and all the cool things that are happening in public works, so really appreciate it. Are there any projects on the horizon that we can see over the next couple of years that outside of what you presented today?
Yes, there are a number of green infrastructure design projects that are currently underway, several that are about to go to construction. We also are moving forward with some sewer separation projects. Again, we don't want to be confined to just green infrastructure, understanding that it is a powerful tool in the toolbox, but it's not the only tool in the toolbox. So along a portion of Water Street, there will be a new stormwater pipe installed in the right-of-way that eventually then will be a new outfall to the Conestoga River, eliminating a large number of CSOs from well over 10 acres. I don't remember the exact acreage.
I think it's well over 10.
Well over 10. So that's very exciting.
Wickersham?
Wickersham is under construction right now, under the new turf field, the new soccer field at Wickersham Elementary School. This will ultimately collect stormwater from close to over 9 acres from Broad Street. And that will virtually disconnect from the majority of the storm events, separate stormwater from wastewater there as well.
And that's funding that you also had approved and voted for a few meetings ago.
Thank you.
Counselor Craig?
Thank you. My question is, how is our ability to install green infrastructure and manage our stormwater contributing to our ability to meet our goals for not putting so much whatever it is that we put into the Chesapeake Bay?
In terms of that mandate from the Chesapeake Bay, it is all related. The EPA has identified that nutrients and sediment are largely the issues with the Chesapeake Bay. Nutrients being nitrogen and phosphorus, there's excessive amounts of that, and it causes real water quality concern. It decreases the oxygen in the Chesapeake Bay, which ends up decreasing recreational value, fish kills, loss of habitat, things like that. So more traditionally, that would affect the separate sewer areas because what we focus on there is water quality only. However, having raw untreated wastewater during high flow events contributes a large amount of pollution. Certainly sediment, you don't want to think too much about that. And then certainly speaking to reduced oxygen levels, things like pathogens and different sorts of bacteria really do degrade the Conestoga River, and that ultimately leads to the Chesapeake Bay. So all of the efforts ultimately go back to the bay.
It also addresses water control and volume that goes into the combined system by either allowing the land to be operating as a sponge and to absorb much of the water before it becomes part of the CSO, or actually the sewer separations, where we're taking parts that are currently in the combined sewer system and separating them out so that part of it is MS4 and less of it is in the CSS. So it's a wide variety of things that contribute to that. I also argue too that the street cleaning efforts that we do, making sure that not only the streets are clean, but the grates are clear so that water can pass as it needs to, and that we're not putting more effluent into the river is important. By being able to have more trees, more green infrastructure, more forebays and rain gardens, et cetera, we're able to modestly treat that water before it gets into the river itself and prevent some of those toxins from reaching the river.
Thank you.
Any other questions from council?
If I may, in regards to the overflow, have you seen, I know that the past, couple of weeks it's been kind of raining. How much has the difference since we've had all this new infrastructure compared to the past few years regarding flooding? Have you seen a big difference? Is the percentage lower?
So it's an intriguing question, one where I would love to have more positive information about. But each year is so different in terms of the amounts of rainfall and the severity of the rainfall. I like to think of this year so far as being a very modest year. The amount of water that we've had to manage and the CSOs that we've had were up until about a month ago, they were 0. And we ordinarily would have had about close to 30 of our 65 anticipated combined sewer overflows by that period. Now, that doesn't mean we're not going to have a severe summer or a severe fall or winter, but so far, we're way ahead of the game for this particular year. But this year is also an anomaly, where we have had significantly less water and less severe rain events in the springtime of the year. So it's difficult to compare. We look at a variety of marker years as the years that we try to measure against. And I think it's, at this moment, even though I think all of us are hopeful, especially in our more scientific conversations about how to address the needs of the consent decree, I would dare say that on the one hand, the storms are becoming more severe, which is why being able to adopt some of the standards that influenced the green infrastructure guideline and the green infrastructure ordinance were important, so that we are staying apace with changes in climate, but also that the technology and what we're measuring and how we're measuring it is much clearer. So part of having Molly on board is that we can measure and establish better metrics that are more predictable over time of what we're doing and how we're doing. So I'd love to be able to answer in a very specific way, but I cannot.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell.
Any other questions from council? Any questions from the public regarding the presentation? Director Campbell, you have a second part of this presentation, and that's the Green Infrastructure Design Manual update, correct?
Yes, we'd like to just very briefly go through this. I mean, it's a much more technical document and a much more technical presentation, but just so you have at least a 20,000-foot understanding of what we have asked the development and the engineering community to do to be able to address our concerns. We wanted to share this.
Presentation. Yes, so while this is being brought up on the screen, just to reiterate, this is, there was an update done, there is currently an update being done, wrapping up final revisions to the Green Infrastructure Design Manual update. So these are the requirements that the private sector is required to meet to manage stormwater on for private projects, redevelopment, new construction, and things like that. So this complements all of the efforts that the city is making. And, you know, we really do, it's called the Green Infrastructure Design Manual. We offer a lot of ways to implement green infrastructure around the city. It does get pretty technical, and I will keep it very high level, and then would welcome any questions. Some of you might recall that the stormwater management ordinance was updated in 2022. Director Campbell had alluded to that, and that was one of the big drivers in the Green Infrastructure Design Manual update to align with the revised requirements, one of which being the metric in which the developer is required to manage stormwater. Previously, it was 1 inch, so that 1 inch equates to a volume of stormwater that's required to be managed from impervious surfaces. So that what was previously 1 inch now with the 2022 ordinance update is 1.25 inches. This was largely to make the city of Lancaster more resilient with climate change and needing to address the majority of stormwater events that the city experiences a year.
As well as to align with other guides that were about to become part of the directive for the state as well as this region.
I'll just make a quick note that, Councilors, we have this PowerPoint. It was included in the email packet for today's meeting. I know, Mr. Harris, you're working to get that up on the screen, but if councilors have it, we can begin with that since it's going to be pretty high level.
Yep,
Okay.
that sounds good. So I am on the second page of this, after the introductory slide here, again, getting into the why. And this is largely same sort of issues, public impervious and private impervious flow to the Conestoga River the same way. So a lot of this why is the same. There are unique challenges with respect to geology, with respect to zoning. We do have a consent decree. One other item to note is that the state stormwater management guidelines are currently being revised. Earlier this year, they had a draft stormwater manual out for public comment. And so a lot of these updates were made to align with trending state updates as well. So this is a really important tool for compliance for the city. Any gallon of stormwater that's not managed from the private development does end up falling on taxpayer dollars here. So it's helpful to work with the development community, and that actually goes right into the next slide here. Input from development community was important. We want to see what challenges they see as they're designing stormwater management in the city of Lancaster. We want to work with them to provide policy on what to do when there are challenges to managing stormwater, which there certainly are in the urban environment as a whole, and especially, again, with respect to these zoning and subsurface conditions in the city of Lancaster. We also wanted to provide incentives to reducing the amount of impervious on a site, incentives to promoting green infrastructure BMPs, and so there was some work done to that effort as well. I am now looking at engineers with experience working for developers provided valuable input. I alluded to this before. There were meetings and correspondence as part of the 2022 ordinance update with the development community. And then specific to the GI design manual, we had a meeting in March with some with some engineering firms, some local engineering firms, received public comment as well. So we've been in communication with them on what they see are challenges and how we can, better structure the document or provide incentives to meet the water quality goals while also making sure that we're doing what we can to work with the very intelligent set of engineers that we have in the city. The next couple slides go into sort of the high-level changes with respect to the chapters that had the most amount of revisions. Chapter 2 is the section of regulatory requirements. So this, again, was largely in part due to the ordinance update, restructuring the ordinance, the regulatory requirements. And then something that we discussed before, going from 1 inch to 1.25 inches. That was very important change as part of the ordinance, but to make sure that we're being robust in the amount of stormwater that developers need to manage. Last thing with this, and this sort of ties into multiple chapters, but one incentive that we are proposing is to lessen the submission requirements for sites that can reduce impervious. If you think about the fact that if you reduce impervious, you're going to reduce runoff inherently. So we set some metrics in place to make sure that that would be the case, but basically a presumed compliance with certain submission requirements. So that will lessen the paperwork. It will incentivize a reduction in impervious, things like planting trees, things such as green roofs, things like that. So we laid out a way that that there can be fewer submission requirements while still meeting our goals. Chapter 3, the purposes here were to provide clarity to users of the GI manual, so really reiterating the importance of incorporating stormwater early in the review process, in the design process. Traditionally speaking, stormwater was sort of an after fact, but because stormwater can be so challenging to manage in an urban environment, it really needs to be part of some of those beginning conversations, both between the developer and their consultants and the city as well. So reiterating and highlighting processes that can help ensure that those conversations happen when they need to happen. I'm going to jump then. Chapter 4, design calculation methodology. I could talk to you all night about that, but I won't. This really gets into the nitty-gritty way that we need to see those calculations presented to ensure that the water quality goals are being met. Chapter 5 are revisions to the design guidelines themselves. These are broken out into general design guidelines for green infrastructure and then breaking into all of the different recommended green infrastructure practices. So updates based on state updates that we mentioned before, making sure that we're aligning with state requirements, as well as industry trends, lessons learned, things like that. And then chapter 6 and 7 are construction guidelines and operation and maintenance. Kind of tying it back to the last presentation on, it's not just the construction, but it's what happens after the construction, how it's constructed and how it's maintained are really important. So just some updates based again on lessons learned, industry trends, and other state guidelines. There are a number of appendices that are proposed to be updated as well. These include infiltration testing, which can tell you how much capacity the soil might have to soak in stormwater, so that's really important. And then there is a new volume compliance worksheet that's being developed, and this will guide developers and engineers for what to do and how to justify and demonstrate that they have challenges on the site, what might happen if they can't use green infrastructure, sort of alternate compliance pathways, because we can't always infiltrate, we can't always use green infrastructure, but we need to make sure that all of these are thoroughly vetted and that those conversations are happening early on. So that's high level. I apologize that you're looking at this based on what was in your file, but would welcome any questions.
Thank you for providing that overview of the updates. I know your team has been working on this for some time, and it has sort of pinpointed or revamping it came at the discussion with developers in mind. So I am very interested and thankful for seeing some of the things that were discussed and kept in mind as it relates to developers taking this into consideration when developing in Lancaster City. I think one question that I do have, in speaking with the developers, I guess, was there any pushback? Was this something that if they're not just, hyper-local developers that they're experiencing outside of communities like Lancaster City? Did it seem like, haha, you're catching up now, we're still, I just wanted to know what their perspective was with having more, maybe in their eyes, nuance coming to a development process.
Yes, that's a great question. It was actually a really productive conversation. It was really encouraging to hear some things that aren't working well, but largely, I think everyone understands that this needs to happen. There was a large discussion around making sure that these were aligning with state updates, because that can be very cumbersome to have one set of calculations for the city, one set of calculations for the state. And so making sure that we can align those and still meet, again, all of the different requirements as much as possible. There was some discussion on things like infiltration testing, things that, to be honest, can be cumbersome. Sometimes they need to be done multiple times. You're mobilizing folks, but it's very important. And so just understanding why that's a challenge for them and what we can do to make sure that we have the highest likelihood of success with these stormwater practices as possible, because they're not inexpensive. And so we really want to make sure that they're designed correctly based on the specific site that they're working at. So there was a lot of those types of discussions.
I also think that some of the pushback was addressed on our part by providing a carrot as well as the stick. So by being able to understand what some of the challenges were, we encouraged the early site assessment so that people would have a better understanding of the site and the challenges as they do that design. We didn't want to get into the trap of saying that the design of the project will be determined by stormwater, but stormwater is a big deal for us, and being able to have a better understanding of how the site might accommodate the stormwater challenges at the beginning became very, very important. Having said that, going through all of these and making certain submissions easier to do, the calculations easier to understand, and making that alignment, we also arrived at a place where, if all else fails, and I continue to say it as a last resort, we do have the option of a fee in lieu of compliance. So we're not offering waivers. As far as I'm concerned, a waiver just means that the water will have to be paid to be managed by the public. But that fee would cover the cost, sewer shed by sewer shed, of the water that's not managed in that particular sewer shed. It's a tool that is used by many municipalities, and we think we have an appropriate set of calculations for that. Lastly, but certainly not least, one of the things that encourages me a lot is that the engineers are hungry to be able to use the revised version of the Screen Infrastructure Guideline, partly because it gives them the tools for having very difficult conversations with their developers. It's not just that we are in a quote-unquote adversarial position with the developer, but the developer has their own goals and guidelines that they're trying to accomplish, and often will marginalize other of the professionals on the team. This at least gives the professionals on the team the ability to say, this is why it's important, include me in some of those strategic discussions early in the process so that we can all have a successful project. I think it has been very, very successful. We've been using the guidelines unofficially for the last several projects that have come across our desks in the last 6 months or so. And the opportunities that these provide in terms of having a different type of discussion is very useful. And in virtually every case, we have solutions for managing that stormwater rather than it just can't be done. You got to give us a slide on this.
Thank you for answering that. And I remember having discussions with you, Director Campbell, where there would be full design plans coming before the team for assessment and then without consideration. So it, as I understand it, it lessens going back to the drawing table when considering ordinances or recommendations or requirements in place. So there is a further incentive for them where it's decreasing hopefully anyway, the design time by not having to have so many revisions and drafts. And then that also, I think we heard, it might have been, I forget who had said it, but, spending hours of city time trying to go back through and make adjustments when, if they had been considered in the first place, the whole process could have been abbreviated. So I'm very thankful to see this. It seems to make sense for both the city and, folks that are developing in the city.
I think that's very true. We're very happy about the volume compliance worksheet because that does allow us to compare apples to apples, project by project, strategy by strategy. And we will also have therefore a record of when were certain exceptions made and how, so that they either can become precedents or if they were the wrong precedent, we can revisit it.
That's great. Thank you. Any questions from committee members?
Councilor Walsh? In regards to the green infrastructure for the roofs, have you seen a large amount of people wanting to participate? Any businesses or any homes? Or is this one that I've seen so far?
I think, if I may,
Sure.
I think there's a lot of desire to be able to do green roofs. If it were less expensive to do, it's a relatively straightforward solution for many of these things. One of the things you'll find in one of the charts in the earlier presentation is that the cost per square foot, if you will, to do a green roof is often several times the cost of doing many of the other green infrastructure strategies. So you really need to have an economic situation for that building that would support an economically efficient or effective utilization of that green roof, and or the ability for that green roof to be used not just to manage stormwater, but perhaps as a roof terrace, as some other kind of amenity that could be monetized in one form or another. But the costs of construction in this area for a city the size of ours with buildings the size of ours, we're really kind of at that threshold where it's often too costly. Having said that, where there are the opportunities, people are jumping at those opportunities to have green roofs where they can.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell.
Any additional questions from council?
If I may, Councilor Walsh. Thank you guys for the presentation and all the work you guys are doing. In regards to the incentive programs, are we also offering incentive programs to homeowners if they're putting any green infrastructure or planting of trees on their privately owned land?
Sure. The short answer is yes. There are a couple different programs associated with specific grant funding to homeowners that wish to install green infrastructure practices on their project or on their site. And this green infrastructure design manual, some of the methodology translate to what we would call a retrofit situation. So they're not obligated to manage stormwater. They're doing it and they're getting associated grant funding for it. There is also a reduction in the stormwater fee that can occur through installation of green infrastructure. So there are a couple different ways that the city is promoting and providing funding for green infrastructure on private property.
And what community engagement methods are we using to alert homeowners of these possible incentives?
So in many cases, it's when they come forward asking to be able to do it, we are discussing a variety of options. If it's strictly building code or zoning, such as the ability to utilize what might be called street trees or shade trees, also as site or urban land use related trees, that becomes a discussion. We're not necessarily incentivizing yet, not advertising yet, go forward and do this to be able to have access to X and Y and Z. We're still working out some of those bugs. And once the green infrastructure guidelines are in place and we're using them for some of the other developments, we can make more of that work. Having said that, we do like the precedent of the sidewalk low-income or low-grant program. And we want to be able to have some variation of that to be able to encourage people to not only incorporate trees in the street and the public right-of-way, but perhaps to also do that with a different source of funding in the private sector as well, in their private backyards. But we have not done a wholesale marketing effort of this yet.
Thank you, and I would look forward to seeing, some of those projects. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from council? From the public?
Tim?
Okay, great. Well, I want to thank both of you for the presentation. I want to thank both of you for the presentation this evening. As usual, it was incredibly thorough and informative and also very interesting. If we do have questions, is it okay if we reach out to the two of you to discuss any of the information that we had today? I know that we gave very high-level views, which I appreciate, but if there are any questions, can folks reach out to you?
Absolutely, we welcome it, we look forward to it. The more people understand and the more people ask about it, the more accessible we can make it to everybody else.
Great. Thank you so much. Really appreciate your time this evening. And Council President, that concludes the Public Works Committee meeting.
Thank you very much. All right. That brings us to the Committee of the Whole this evening, and there is one item that I'm bringing forward. It is Resolution Number 49, 2023, and it's a resolution approving the Juneteenth flag raising for 2024. As you may all recall, back in 2022, we adopted our flag ordinance that, among other things, said that applicants who wish to do a flag raising at City Hall needed to make an application at least 120 days in advance. And I'm pleased to report that organizations have taken that to heart. And so our flag raising for Juneteenth in 2024 is now before us. It's pretty straightforward. This is through the NAACP Lancaster branch. They've submitted its timely application, and we may consider this to approve that they have their date, which would be June 19th of 2024 with a inclement weather date of June 20th, 2024. And that's pretty much all that resolution does. Are there any questions from members of council about that? From the public? Hearing none, I'll make a motion to move this resolution to our full council meeting on July 11th.
Second.
We had several seconds. Mr. Harris?
Yes, Madam President. Mr. Ahmed? Aye. Mr. Arroyo?
Aye.
Mr. Cleese?
Aye.
Ms. Gregg?
Aye.
Ms. Diaz?
Aye.
Ms. Walsh?
Aye.
President Baker?
Aye. Thank you. We'll use that as a reminder to have all organizations be as on the ball as the NAACP was on this one, so thank you. That concludes the Committee of the Whole. Mr. Harris, you've submitted your clerk's report in writing. Would it be okay if we forego the verbal reading of that report this evening?
Absolutely, Madam.
All right. Then with our business concluded, I will hear a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you.